Today is Tuesday, November 21st, 2023. With me is Sever Peterson. Sever, I'd like to start by asking you about when you were younger, did people have trouble separating you from your dad or your grandfather?
No, I think my grandfather, whom I never knew, he passed away before I was born, went by Severin, and my dad went by Sever, and I suspect maybe to differentiate father from son. And S-E-V-E-R, Sever, is what my dad went by. And then when I was born, Severin, I was not Severin at home. Started school, but it seemed to be a long handle because that's how I was registered at school. And they started calling me my family nickname, which was CV, S-E-V-I-E. So I was a CV growing up. My dad was Sever, and some family would, in occasions, call me Sever. That was my name, and that became my name then in later years.
Can you tell me a little bit about your family history, your grandparents, your great-grandparents, how they came to the U.S.?
I can tell you a little bit about it. My paternal grandfather and grandmother came independently, single, to the United States. They met here in Minneapolis, and then they moved to Eden Prairie not long after in the late 1880s, and they were here in Minneapolis in the 1880s. My maternal grandparents, and they were German, my paternal grandparents were Swedish, and my maternal grandparents were from Germany, and they also came as single people, and but they came to the Philadelphia area in Pennsylvania, and that was in the 1840s and 50s that family came.
So you were born in 1944, and you graduated from Eden Prairie High School in 1962. What was it like growing up in Eden Prairie during that time? What was the community like?
Well, the community was quite small, and it seemed that everybody knew everyone, even by the cars we drove. I mean, we'd see a car coming, and I'd know that would be, Johnny Morley, or that would be Bill Quam, or Art Rogers, or whomever. We knew by the cars. There were not that many cars on the road, and we didn't really travel. We were on the south end of Eden Prairie, and our farm was down in the river valley, which was not really a well-traveled road. It was a through road. It used to be before 169 and 212 was built. It was the road to Shakopee, but after the highways were built in the 30s, then it was no longer used as a thoroughfare. It was used for the landowners along that road. And it was a very small community. It felt like we all knew each other. We certainly all knew of each other.
I'd like to ask you about Sevy, the little boy. What were his interests? What did he do for fun?
I enjoyed, and you asked that question just yesterday. My youngest grandson, 4 years old, was at the farm, and he loves to be on a piece of equipment. So we were driving one of the smaller tractors around the yard, and actually I say we, I use that term loosely, because I just ran the pedals if we needed them. But he did the steering and drove us around the yard, and he was able to navigate it. But taking it back to my youth, I remember that was one of the most fun things for me to do as I grew up, would be driving that tractor around the yard. Even I remember doing that before school, and it was just an enjoyable experience. But I didn't have that many hobbies on the farm. As we grew up, my sister and I have a sister 1 year younger than me, and the two of us did quite a bit of hunting with my dad. We enjoyed that time, and it wasn't so much the hunt as it was the time together. As I look back at pictures of those activities, and in the family in the wintertime, we'd have more time, and we did a lot of playing outside. My dad and one of the hired men would build a little ice pond right outside the door of the house, and a little ice rink, and we kids skated there on the ice rink, and we played quite a bit of cards in the winter. We didn't have a TV when I was young. I remember we got a TV when I was in the third grade. I remember the night the TV arrived. because at school, we all sat in the bleachers, and those bleachers still exist at Eden Prairie School. That's where we ate our lunch. When I say we sat there, the kitchen was just off the gymnasium where the cooks prepared the meal. We kids picked it up and we went down and we sat on the bleachers. And if we, those of us that didn't have television, we didn't have as much interaction in the conversation as those that were able to see I Love Lucy the night before. And so I remember the night we got TV. But you asked about activities. I think most families had their activities together at home, and a lot of that in the wintertime was card playing in the evenings, and there wasn't that much TV. In the summertime, even after we got TV, there was no TV in the summer. A tube came out of the television so that we kids could not be sitting in front of the TV, because our activities, and I wanted to share this as well, our activities for my siblings and I were very much activities having to do with the household, and running the household, and running the farm.
We have a photo of you at a tractor rodeo. What happens at a tractor rodeo?
Well, it was an activity for, there was a tractor and we had to hook it on to a manure spreader, and then we had to back it, not drive it through, back it through an obstacle course, like a ski course. And that's what happens at that tractor rodeo.
And did you win any awards at the tractor rodeo?
I didn't. I think I just turned 10 years old a few years before that rodeo. It was in August of '54, and my birthday is August 18th of '54. And I had just turned 10 years old. But I didn't necessarily think I was young. I grew up on tractors. I felt comfortable with it. I did not win, but it was a fun day. It was a very fun day.
So thinking about high school, do you have any particular high school memories or teachers that stand out for you? I know that in 1951, you were the crown bearer for the king and queen at homecoming.
Well, and the young lady there with me was Marilyn Griffiths here from Eden Prairie. We were fellow first graders, and the activities, the teachers that we enjoyed. Our first grade teacher, it was a new experience for us. None of us had ever been to preschool. We didn't know anything about preschool. None of us had any kindergarten experience. And I remember learning colors in school. Now our grandkids at 3 and 4 years old, and everybody's grandkids recognize colors, and they know their colors, and they know it from TV and so on. But I remember learning our colors, not just me, my whole class. And so the school had to, they had to really teach us, and we came maybe prepared for school, but we had no background yet in school when we started. But through the years, I remember I had a particularly interesting teacher in the 7th grade. It was a geography teacher, and we had to learn every country in the world and every capital in the world and the products of that country. And in the states, we had to learn every state and the capitals. And I no longer remember all those, but many of the countries in the world have changed names, and we've added a couple of states, Hawaii and Alaska. Those are easy to remember. But anyway, our school experience was a wonderful time for us. The teachers they seemed to be, and at the time I don't know that I knew it, but as I look back on it, they were certainly engaged in their students' welfare and our welfare, and we students, we still love to get together, not only as classmates but as schoolmates. And and again, it was families that my family had known in the history of its existence here in Eden Prairie, and as they had known us in our existence here in Eden Prairie. So we kids in school, especially my classmates, we felt that we knew one another even better, as we talk about it today, than we almost knew our own families. We had more time together because when we got home, everybody was busy. It wasn't just my family that was busy. Every family had activities. The berry growers, they were busy, and the dairy farmers, they were busy, and everybody was busy with their lives at home. So in school, we got to concentrate on one another, and it was a fun time. We enjoyed that.
You graduated in 1962 from Eden Prairie High School and went to the University of Minnesota. You received your degree in agricultural economics?
That's all correct. That's correct.
And were you at home during this time, or?
Part of it. In my last couple of years at the university, I was only going winter quarter because fall, and it was on a quarter system at that time, fall, winter, and spring. And fall quarter, I was busy getting the harvest in. Winter quarter, I could go because I could come home and take care of the livestock we had at that time yet. And spring quarter, I had to be there planting the crops and so on. So my last 2 years, I really concentrated my classes into the winter quarter, and I graduated in 1967. So I graduated a year later because I hadn't been there for spring and fall quarters.
In 1967, you decided to go to Vietnam as part of Project Concern. Not as alternative service, but because you were passionate about learning more about the world. And what did you learn from that experience?
Well, I learned that the people of these other countries are just like the people of our country. It can be set apart from the politics of the country. And the people of Vietnam, that was a wonderful experience for me. And it also, Vietnam was I'm going to say, it became a divisive topic at that time. And we had many of there were family members of a number of families at Eden Prairie that they did not survive their life in Vietnam. And I felt I was opposed to the war at that time, but I felt that I wanted to go. I wanted to serve my country. I wanted to be there in support of the neighbors and the families of the neighbors that were also there, our fellow Minnesotans, fellow Americans, and so I wanted to have that experience in Vietnam.
How did your parents react to you? Excuse me. How did your parents react to you wanting to go to Vietnam in 1970?
Well, I think because it took some time away from the farm, and that had to be talked about a little bit. But my dad okayed that, and I think he thought, well, it'd be an experience for me, and it was something he knew I wanted to do. My mother was, I think she felt that it might be a good opportunity for me in life, if that's how I was looking at life, to go ahead. And I won't say they were supportive, but they did not refuse me. And our family, my mom and dad, however my mom and dad would have said that's the way it ought to be, it's the way it was with our family. And so if they had said, no, you can't go, or you shouldn't go, I wouldn't have gone. It just would have been unthinkable to have gone then. But they didn't say that, because they also knew that of my interests, and also the other families in America, that their sons and daughters were going, and therefore, why not me?
You returned from Vietnam, and you decided, being the adventurer that you are, that you wanted to go to South America with a friend.
Yes. So we took off in a Volkswagen Bug here from Minnesota in that would have been 1969. And we drove through Mexico, through Central America. We got to Panama, and we thought maybe we could even drive with that Volkswagen Bug to South America. But they discouraged us. They said, even in the dry season, you might not make it, but certainly not in the wet season. You won't make it. So we left the car in Panama, and we flew to Bogota, Colombia, and then began a bus journey in South America. It was very interesting time for both of us.
While you were on the trip, your father died?
No, he became gravely ill. While I was on that trip, he became gravely ill. And my mother would send letters, for example, to, in this case, Lima, Peru. Please hold for Sever Peterson, general delivery. And I'd go to the post office in these national capitals and get a letter if there was one there. And in Lima, Peru, there was one. And my mother explained that my father was very ill. Our brother was in Australia. He was on the mission field in Australia at the time, and I was the only boy there that could really help out my dad on the farm at that. And I hadn't been there for the winter. Hired men were there, but she asked me if I would. She thought I really ought to be considering to come home. So I turned around and came home. And it wasn't until 2 weeks after I returned home that my father died. I didn't, I think no kids expect their parents to be on their deathbed unless it's said that way. And it was not said that way until he arrested.
So you returned home. Did you have to immediately take control of the family farm?
Yes. Yes, I did. But, we were still a family unit, and we'd all been working on the farm, and so it seemed to be a very comfortable transition. But it was not comfortable for my mother and my sisters and my brother and I. My brother went back to Australia, so he was removed in that way. He was physically removed, but he'd been very much a part of the farm, and still is today, very much part of the farm. But it just seemed most natural that I remained most involved then in the farm. But the rest of the family was also still involved at that time, including my mother.
So you're farming, and then sometime in the mid-'70s, you met the love of your life, Sharon. How did the two of you meet?
Well, I was going to a board meeting for Project Concern, the organization that I worked with, the medical relief organization that I worked with in Vietnam, and that was in San Diego, California. And there were hardly anybody else. There was hardly anybody else on the flight, and so the flight attendants had a little time to visit with those of us that were en route. And I had a little conversation with Sharon en route, and enough that I invited her to come out to the farm, and she did, and that was the last time I saw her for almost 6 years, and then we re-met on a mountaintop at Park City, Utah. We were both skiing. And I didn't recognize her because she was all covered up with goggles and face masks and so on because it was so cold. But she recognized me, and we re-met, and that was in 76, and 78 we got married.
And Sharon has been a true partner through these years, hasn't she?
Oh, that's almost an understatement, Tom. She certainly has. She really has become part of our farm operation, and for example, she and my sisters are best friends, and my sister-in-law and my sisters-in-law, I only have one still alive, but they became they became true sisters.
Let's shift gears and talk about the business of farming. How did your family business grow from a small stand run by your uncle and your dad to having 24 stands?
Well, even at the time that it was a small stand, as you referred to, which was located where the Lion's Tap is, that's how it was built for a vegetable market by my dad and my uncle, the Lion's Tap building, as it existed then. But the Depression came in that time, and the drought years, and my dad and my uncle, they had river bottom production, which they could irrigate, and irrigation was not so common in those days. In fact, it wasn't common at all. But they could irrigate, and they also had the water holding capacity of these river bottom lands that were highly productive, and it was a good situation. But during those Depression years, they trucked a lot of produce to the Iron Range and to South Dakota, because South Dakota was really hit with the drought. And they would park by the creameries and in South Dakota, because the farmers that were coming in to sell their milk at the creamery, they'd have a few dollars, and it was a godsend for them to be able to take fresh produce home to their families. So that was a big step in the Peterson family farm in terms of its expansion and growth. And then as my siblings and I grew up, my dad was involved in commercial radish production, as well as commercial sweet corn, squash, and melons. And he expanded that in our youth, and we kids became very much part of that. And then in those days, the chain stores were coming, and if you had the produce that would fit into what they were needing here in Minnesota at the time, and sweet corn was one of those things. It was a very popular vegetable as we grew up in Minnesota, and we were sweet corn growers, and so they grew that way, and that's how it's begun to expand. But in my generation, as I became more involved, I was looking for something that would give us some profitability aside from corn and soybeans, which was pretty level, minimal profitability for most farmers, including us. And we thought that we had the labor and some experience at it. And so we went into that. But we were looking for things that we could do to prepare for the generation following me. And so then we got into more vegetable markets. We had 24 of those at one time, which took quite a few people from the neighborhood working on the farm, including all of my nieces and nephews. So that was a real special time for my wife and I to work with these young people from the sons and daughters of our neighbors or in the fellow Eden Prairieites and Shakopee and Chaska. They were wonderful kids, and our own nieces and nephews. But we were also looking for something that's how we got into the entertainment business, the agriculture entertainment, because I was thinking, well, what will there be for the next generation? How will they support themselves on the farm if all of them want to be involved? And we only had 2 kids, but our in-laws are totally involved as well. Our son-in-law and our daughter-in-law from the Michelson family and from the Jackson family here in Eden Prairie. Both families, they grew up in Eden Prairie. Both families had worked for us even before they were dating our son and daughter. And so my wife and I like to say that we were in love with our daughter-in-law and our son-in-law before our daughter and son were in love with them. They didn't realize that they were going to marry those kids. And we didn't realize they were going to marry them either, but we knew we loved them.
I want to ask you about the corn maze. Excuse me. How did you come up with the idea of the corn maze, and how difficult was it to get it started?
Well, the idea of the corn maze came from a trip that Sharon and I made to England, and we were visiting a former exchange student. And, just to flash back for a moment, you'd asked me about the University of Minnesota. Well, I was at the University of Minnesota my first year there. I met I met a very interesting guy in one of the agriculture classes I was in, and we developed a friendship. And then he went on to explain that he was here from Germany on an agriculture exchange program. And after some more visits, he said, he suggested that maybe my family and I might be interested in such a thing. So I asked my parents about it, and they said, well, it sounds kind of interesting. And so we started in 1965. We had our first agricultural exchange student, and we've had students ever since that time. And for example, this year we have one from Argentina, one from Brazil, and one from Georgia. And I mean the country of Georgia, not from the state of Georgia. And they, very interesting to have them, and how they've opened the eyes and provided interesting experiences for my family and I, starting with my mom and dad, and including all of my siblings and I and our families, and now the generation behind me. They love to visit these. But I was visiting a farm in England, one of these exchange students, and this was in the early 70s, I would say, mid-70s, it was more of the mid-70s, and I saw, these famous hedge mazes in England. And I thought, I wonder if there's something like that could ever be interesting on a farm. And I wasn't putting it together enough, but I was thinking about how to do it, and I thought, well, let's do it in a cornfield. And so that's how it started. But we were not the first. There was a group from England came over, and they created one on a farm in Pennsylvania. That was the first one. And when I saw that one in a farm magazine, I said, Sharon, we're no longer the first, but let's do it. And she said, you're on your own. But that attitude only lasted about 2 days, and she was 100% there. But that's how it started. And again, it was a way for us it was interesting, and it was intellectually or I'll say professionally stimulating for our family, including me. And that's how we started it.
So you've had to evolve in your farming life. You've had to, I believe you had a hemp business at some point?
I did not. The next generation had that, and of course I worked with them on it, and I don't claim any expertise or knowledge of it because it's quite complex and bewildering to me, but I enjoyed, that was one of their next steps in our operation. Another next step in the operation, I think, really came from our son-in-law, and that is a light show where they have 2.5 million lights. It's part of Sever's Fall Festival, but all of the next generation, our daughter-in-law, son-in-law, son and daughter, they've really expanded the maze, which we now call the Fall Festival, and then it goes into the light show. And so and the hemp, and they've grown those things. They're expanding those things.
I'm curious, how were you able to get the family members to stick with the business? Were they excited, or it seems that they would have gone off and done something different?
Well, you ask a good, interesting question, and I think it's a question for a sociologist, not for a parent. But I did caution them, and I remember even cautioning our daughter-in-law and son-in-law in this vein and saying, I don't want you to think that I made it so easy for you to come to the farm that you someday resent that you didn't go on to grad school or that you didn't do this in life or that in a professional life. I said, look at those things very carefully and do what you want to do. But if it is something you want to do, let's have at it. And that didn't include me. I was a follower at that point because our son always enjoyed agriculture and the farm production and the activities associated with it and the friendships associated with it. And our daughter did as well. I mean, at 6, 7, 8 years old, they were totally involved in the packing of the sweet corn, for example. And as they became 8, 9, 10 years old, they became involved in the sales at the vegetable markets. And it was fun to see them there. They knew that they not only picked that corn in the morning, but now they were selling it during the day. And and of course the customers enjoyed their involvement as well. So it was supported by the community and the people that enjoyed sweet corn and melons and cucumbers and so on here in Minnesota.
One of the things that I've asked you previously is, what's the secret to sweet corn?
Well, I would say that the secrets of sweet corn is where it's grown, how it's handled, how fresh it is when it's sold, and the variety.
The fact that your farm is located in the floodplain, does that impact the quality of the vegetables you grow?
Well, the occasional floods that we had as I grew up, and they would be spring floods, with excessive runoff in the spring of the year, heavy rains, on top of heavy snowpack that melt, and then warm weather and melted real fast, we'd have some spring floods. But that would bring some sediment and silt onto the fields that seemed to add fertility. In fact, I would say certainly in my recollection it did add fertility, but it was a special there were special nutrients and so on there that really grew good crops, and it was easy to grow them, at least for our family. It made it easier for our family to grow them. We didn't claim any particular expertise other than experience itself.
But you've seen more flooding in the last couple of decades, haven't you?
Yes, we have. And that's becoming problematic in the Minnesota Valley. Even communities such as here in Eden Prairie we live, and our neighbors of Shakopee and Chaska and so on, we've had to raise dikes around various communities. We've raised entire highway sections. Here in Eden Prairie, where 169 and 212, it's now Flying Cloud Drive, passes through the river valley. They've had to raise the highway because of these floods that have become more frequent. But that's a separate issue. Some of it may be related, and probably is related, to climate change, but it's certainly related to an agronomic practice in Minnesota agriculture, and that's field drainage. And as field drainage has expanded in Minnesota, it has certainly affected the frequency and velocity of the flooding in the Minnesota River.
For those Eden Prairie residents who don't know where your farm is located, can you describe the general boundaries of it?
Well, we farmed. We didn't necessarily own all of that valley, but from Lookout Park, which is right below the Flying Cloud Airport Tower, and from that portion where the Minnesota River came up to the north bluff, that was a Clark farm in Eden Prairie, and we rented that farm for all of my life until a few years ago, when the owners then, it was a hunting club and it still is a hunting club, when the owners then chose to put it into a federal program, and I understand that, they too realized that continuing production in the valley is becoming very problematic. But from that point on the east boundary, we then went down toward Chaska. And the land that we didn't own, we rented there from the Marshall family, from the Regay family, and those were two other families there in the valley. And we rented those properties, the Paul family also, and we ended up buying that farm. But that was the home farm and the extension of the home farm, and that was located in the valley. You basically can say from 101 going into Shakopee until Flying Cloud Airport, we farmed that part of the valley most of my life.
I want to return to memory lane and ask you, I want to take our listeners, our viewers, back to Eden Prairie in the 50s and the 60s. Where did you go shopping? What did you do for fun? Okay,
those are two pretty different questions. So if I forget part of one, I'll address one. Yeah, please. Our shopping was done in Shakopee, a little bit in Chaska, some in Hopkins. And the reason for the diversity, because Minneapolis Moline, an agricultural machinery company, they were centered in Hopkins, Minneapolis Moline. And so we go to Hopkins for parts for the tractor. I remember we went to a tire shop there in Hopkins for tires for the vehicles on the farm, etc. So we did, I'll say, farm shopping there in Hopkins. And Glen Lake was too small. I don't even know if it had a grocery store in Glen Lake. Chanhassen did not have a grocery store. Eden Prairie certainly didn't have a grocery store. It didn't even have a downtown through those years. But Shakopee is where we went for groceries, the doctor, the dentist, the hardware store, and those kinds of activities. We did that in either Shakopee and sometimes even in Chaska.
And then what did you do for fun?
Thank you for reminding me about the second part of the question. And for fun, our family, we really enjoyed what we were doing on the farm, and we were busy all day long at that. As I remember, we didn't play baseball on Sundays, because Sunday was a day of rest for my mom and dad, and in the morning, it didn't matter how late we were out on Saturday night, but we certainly had to get up and were expected to get up, and we did get up, and we went to church and Sunday school together at the Methodist Church here in Eden Prairie. And Sunday afternoons was a family time. We would picnic, and oftentimes that would include some activities either along the Minnesota River, in various places there that we enjoyed as a family, or on the bluffs overlooking the Minnesota Valley, which is now the Richard T. Anderson Park. That was a farm that belonged to our family. Or at Riley Lake, or one of the other local lakes, Starring Lake, Riley Lake, Bryant Lake. But we'd get together with other families in Eden Prairie and enjoy a Sunday afternoon at the lake.
In 2018, you were given the Heritage Preservation Award. You've seen a lot of change. Who can you recall that had a significant impact on your life or on Eden Prairie?
Well, in terms of, that's a two-part question again. And first, in terms of my life, I had an aunt and uncle that lived on the farm, and they owned the farm at that time, which is now the Richard T. Anderson Park. And their name was Eriksson, and Axel, his name was Axel. He came from Sweden to marry my aunt. I don't think it was an arranged marriage. I'm not sure of that. But while they lived on that farm, it was a dairy farm, and she worked in the barn, not as physically as hard as all that he did. He did the hard physical work, but she certainly was totally involved in the milking and other responsibilities on the farm. And they also had berries on that farm, strawberries. And so they'd have a crew come from Shakopee, young kids, and help them pick those berries in the summertime. But I'd help them do hay, I'd live there in the winter. The school bus even picked me up there. But they didn't have any children. Their single daughter was grown and out of the home at that point. She was an older sister of my father. But they were my godparents, and I loved spending time on that farm there with them. And we still have the house that they lived in, and that was built by the Feltman family, and they were pioneers here in Eden Prairie, the Feltman family. And it's now, as I say, Richard T. Anderson. But we'd go up those hills, up the bluffs, and those roads still exist up there, not as roads, but as trails, and farmed up on the hills besides some neighbors there, the Dorncampers and the Jakeses and the Rogers. And they thrashed together. You asked about history. And that was an old history, but that I didn't realize it at the time that it was history. I thought it was the day's activities, which it was at the time. That was the day's work. That was what we were doing. But it was very enjoyable to join together with these neighbor families, and we'd thrash at their homes and on their farms, and then they'd be over at my aunt and uncle's thrashing when we were harvesting the crop there, and so that was. I didn't realize it, but it was really an early introduction to immersion and involvement in the other families in Eden Prairie for me, because I wasn't playing baseball with them and other social activities, but here we could be working together. And that was a lot of fun and very interesting, and to get to know our neighbors, and the wonderful people that they were that way. As we went farther then along into history here in Eden Prairie, I think of Helen Anderson. She married into the Anderson family, and she was such a pioneer. And then Marie Berger Wittenberg. Marie was born here in Eden Prairie, a neighbor to us down on the south side of Eden Prairie. The Rudy and Ada Berger's oldest daughter, Marie, and she was she was wonderful also in following behind Helen Anderson in Eden Prairie. And then there was Kathy Case. And when she and Ron moved here to Eden Prairie, Ron is now our mayor here in Eden Prairie, they've become so involved in the activities and the history of Eden Prairie. And Kathy and other people that she's drawn in around her and that have grown through her introductions and the jobs that they've done here for history in Eden Prairie, I think is just fabulous. But there was others along the way that were never officers. For example, I think of Ernie Schulteis. He lived on Bryant Lake, and he did a lot of looking at, what do you call it, fish, I don't even know how to, it wasn't the fish to eat, microfish or something, I think they called it. And he would scour through this, and he'd come with wonderful tidbits of history for the rest of us to contemplate and incorporate into the history of Eden Prairie. But those kinds of people was just wondering, and there were many of them, and now there's even more, and they are coming more and more.
Previously, you had told me that John Rogers was an influence.
Excuse me?
Previously, you had told me that John Rogers was an important influence on your life?
I said Jack Regay.
Oh.
But John Rogers also. John Rogers and Jack Regay were two of my father's.
I'm sorry. Let's stop there. I'll skip that question.
Okay.
The community started to change in the 1970s. The mall came in, and then farms started to disappear. Was the change incremental, slow, or did it happen rapidly for you?
I think it was quite slow, but it's certainly after the late 70s it happened quite rapidly. But again, we were somewhat isolated. The Petersons were somewhat isolated down in the river bottoms. We were a little bit out of the mainstream of driving daily and viewing the various areas of Eden Prairie. But I can remember that families in Eden Prairie, that they were no longer engaged. The next generation of their families had involved themselves in careers off the farm. And so, we rented some of those farms in Eden Prairie. For example, Homer Regay comes to mind, and various others, many others. And so the family involvement on those farms was changing because they knew that their future was not going to be on that property in Eden Prairie. I don't know if I really knew it because it changed. You used the word incremental, and it changed incrementally and rather slow in our lives, but very quickly in history.
Farms are disappearing. Are you worried about losing your farm?
My next birthday is number 80, and I can remember birthdays in my life, and the one that was a shock to me was the 30th, because I was no longer in my 20s. And I think many humans in our culture here in America, we enjoy our teen years, but I think we look forward to our 20s. And I've been in my 20s, it seemed like forever, but suddenly I was no longer in my 20s, and I thought, what in the world happened? But so 80 doesn't seem old to me any longer, and it certainly did when I was 30. I thought, boy, I don't know how many people I even knew that were 80 years old. But be that as it may, I don't know. It is what it is, and I've enjoyed, I'd have to say, every day of it.
You love farming. Are you ever going to retire?
I do enjoy farming. I love farming, as you say, and I love I'm going to say the associations with it. It wasn't just farm productions, although I really loved that part of it, like every farmer does, whether it be with his livestock or her livestock, whatever, the families. But it was also in our interpersonal relationships with one another here in Eden Prairie as we grew up, all of us. There's not a family that has a history in Eden Prairie, and they all have histories in Eden Prairie, that we haven't enjoyed the time that we had growing up with them, living in the community with them, and sharing our lives and our culture. Our Eden Prairie culture, which was part of our Minnesota culture and part of our American culture. And it's a little scary right now with I'm going to say the divisiveness that I as a Minnesotan, as an Eden Prairieite, sense in America, and that seems to be so contrary to anything that I grew up with.
When you reflect back on your life, what pleases you the most?
When I reflect back on my life, what pleases me the most? I love that question. I'm not sure how to answer it, but I would say what pleases me the most, and I was just touching on it as I reflect on the question, and that is the relationships that my family and I, my siblings and I, my mom and dad and I and my siblings have had with our friends and neighbors here in the community, and of whom that we had the opportunity to socialize with, work with, go to school with, spend time with. And as I think about even the next generation for my siblings and me, the next generation for those, Sharon and I have had the very great pleasure of working with all of them on our farm here in Eden Prairie, so that they are very much a part of the family that my siblings and I so loved and enjoyed growing up with here in Eden Prairie. I'm so grateful to have been born and raised and grew up and still live in Eden Prairie, Minnesota.
Sever, thank you for taking the time today.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you.